Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. Right, so for today's session, buat online lah because quite busy in the morning, so I tak sempat nak, go through a few things. But for today's session, we are going through the topic number 8, okay, bank management profitability. This topic is quite important, not only because of part of the syllabus, obviously, but some part of the syllabus, or actually the topic, is actually for your group assignments, as I mentioned last week. So let's look at the presentation for today. This would be the content. With capital adequacy framework as the initial part of it. Why capital? First of all, we will see that we will discuss what is capital adequacy, or what is capital at first, and then why we need a capital adequacy framework and what will be the importance. And then the second part would be the liquidity management, asset quality, loan portfolio, and loan management. And we're going to go through some credit process, how the bank's credit, activities is, we are conducting it, step by step. Then in terms of problem loan detection with regards to red flags, and if the bank having problems with collections, so they need to do some recovery. Okay, and we will discuss a few recovery techniques. Okay, and then number 3 and 4, basically what would be your assignments related to ratios, and the source of it comes from the financial statements of the bank, okay. Statement of financial positions, and also the income statement of profit and loss. And we're going to go through all the relevant ratios and how to basically calculate each and every ratios. Okay, so as I mentioned, bank capital is very, very important. And this is the final category or liability side of a balance sheet. So technically, okay, let's say if I or a C account of a bank's balance sheet, so you're going to have assets on the sides. Okay, here liability side. Okay, so bank capital dia berada dekat sini lah, capital. Okay, so technically it's part of equity as well lah. So and at this right hand side of the balance sheet, kalau dalam most financial statements of a bank sekarang di dalam bentuk like vertical punya positioning. Okay, vertical punya positioning. And there's something wrong with the line dekat office ni. So the video sometimes they on and off. Yeah. But you can see the slides, right? Dia tak nampak. You're sharing. Okay, now you're sharing. So yeah, so capital ada kat situ lah, the other side of statement of financial positions. And capital provides protection for depositors and any other creditors in the event if the assets of the company decline in the value. Okay. And minimum capital is required by the commercial bank, investment bank, to operate as a going concern entity. Okay, so And this capital sebenarnya exists in the bank, especially, if you're talking about bank from day one. So when they started their banking operations, obviously they will have capital, but this capital will obviously grow from year to year basis. All right. Okay. So what is considered as capitals? Right. We have number one here, the very first one. Kalau kat sini kita letak number one is the equity capital, right? So we have the stocks, we have the surplus. Okay, surplus meaning if the bank generate profits, okay, and they have from the profits they generated, obviously they will pay out dividend to the shareholders. So there'll be some portions that will be, they will not give out some portion of the profits to the shareholders, so they will keep it in the company. So that's part of the equity capital as well lah. Okay, so that's number one. Okay, internally selalunya lah from here. And some they will put it in reserves. So reserve means sometimes we may call them as retained earnings as well. Okay, earnings. Okay, so they might keep these retained earnings as part of capital. Can be in the form of preferred stocks. This is number three. So capital stock ataupun common stocks and preferred stock will be two different types of capital. So preferred stock comes from external investors. Okay, cuma the treatment of preferred stocks, the company needs to pay them a fixed return, okay, for stockholders. Okay, so the money that they invested to us will be capital as well. And finally, subordinated notes and debentures are actually a part of loan. Okay, sebenarnya loan. Okay, long-term loan. Okay, example is bonds. Bonds. So these are the types of bond actually. Debentures, subordinated notes. Okay, example of long-term loans. And these loans can be part of capital as well. So they borrow money from outside, from external, and the money they generated will be as a capital. Okay, so you can see the diverse source of capital for a bank, right? Can be from internally, from the reserves, from the external investors, or can coming from loans. Okay. So why the capital important? Okay, needed funds to organize and operate as a banking institution. Okay, obviously, as I mentioned before, the majority of funds is actually coming from the deposits. Okay, deposit ni adalah one of the largest source of funds. Okay, for a company. But before any other sources of fund come into the bank, or capital will be the initial, as I mentioned earlier, initial startups amount that they have in the institution. Okay, so that's why it is important to have a capital. Mana boleh buka business, solely 100% coming from other people's money. Okay, they need some form of capital first before they can attract investors, for example. Number two, promotes public confidence. Okay, to promote public confidence, especially related to the creditors and borrowers. Okay, peminjam and also pemberi pinjaman. Pemberi pinjaman is creditors, peminjam adalah borrowers. So we want to showcase as a bank that they have a very strong fundamental finance ataupun funds in the bank. So if they have to borrow money in the future, or if they're giving out loans to the customers, these two parties especially will have a very strong confidence with the bank because they have a very, like I said, fundamentally strong with regards to their capital. Number three, promotes funds to the firm's growth and development of new products and services. Obviously, when they want to introduce new products, services to the market, sometimes they need money, they need funds. Okay, so where this money comes from, obviously from the capital, okay, from the reserve, for example. Okay, sebab nak introduce new services, they might have to purchase, I don't know, new database, or they need to have a new software, or they need to have a new mainframe to the bank, for example. So with regards to technology and whatnot. So obviously all of this requires investment, and investment needs funding, needs money. So if they have a very strong capital, obviously they can introduce a lot of things to the customers. And obviously when the customer's happy with the products and services, it will continuously will grow in terms of the development of the country, development of the bank. Okay. Number 4 serves as a regulator of growth. Okay, it's ensuring obviously even individually macam kita pun, we need to have a very strong reserves. Kita kena ada certain amount of money in our bank account so that we can sustain if anything bad happens to us. Okay, and this growth is sustainable, especially in the long run. Okay, so that's why importance is very capital. The capital is very important. Okay, it's like you imagine like yourself lah. Okay, kita kena ada savings, a certain value of savings, especially to cover our monthly expenses if anything happen in terms of our employment, in terms of our health, for example. So kita kena ada backup lah as a reserves, okay, as a capital, so that, like I said lah, if anything unexpected happen, okay, we have like a buffer, right, or a safety net for a while lah untuk sustain. So when we talk about capital, Bank Negara sets a minimum capital adequacy to ensure that there's a minimum amount every bank should maintain, okay, at any point of time. So as a cushion against unanticipated shocks, okay, as I mentioned earlier, something that we cannot predict, that's something that extraordinary happen. For example, here they bagilah if there's a shock against interest rate risk, okay, it's all of risk we already discussed before, interest rate risk, whereby the fluctuations of interest rate risk ataupun the fluctuations of interest rate might, give us a negative impact to the banking or to the account ataupun to the value of their assets, for example, or even liabilities. Okay, credit risk, obviously, as a bank especially, they will always have this kind of risk from their customers and any other operational risk. So in order to protect, okay, if there's very steep ataupun impact towards especially related dengan finance, so capital is very important. The buffer, as I mentioned. So from regulators' point of view, minimum capital adequacy is stability of the financial system. As I mentioned, banking industry is one of the very important industry in any particular country, in of the country, whereby almost everybody is somehow related with the banking industry. So that's why, as a government, and in Malaysia, obviously the via Bank Negara Malaysia, want to ensure this industry is always stable in terms of the especially related with the shock from external factors. Okay, and number 2, to protect depositors, because when we talk about banking, one of the main function of it is for depositing funds. So this depositing ataupun the depositors basically needs to be protected, and obviously as depositors, they want confidence. They want to ensure that when they deposit their money, money will be safe, obviously, and it will be protected. Okay, so that's why from regulators, so dalam case ni regulator kita adalah Bank Negara Malaysia, the BNM. Okay, so they want this all banks basically to have a minimum capital adequacy. So by definition, capital adequacy means legal requirements that a financial institution should have enough capital to meet all obligations and funds that services it offers. Okay, so this function of capital adequacy is to provides protection for depositors and any other creditors in the event when the assets decline in value, right? So the decline in value can come from various factors, as I mentioned before lah. Either the interest rate risk ataupun the interest rate itself can cause the asset to decline in value. The currency exchange also can cause the assets to decline in value, especially if they have assets in overseas. So that's number one. Number two, to provide a buffer to absorb losses and allow institutions to remain viable. And lastly, to serve as a cushion against any unpredicted operating and financial losses. So this is already discussed in the previous slide. Okay, so this is a legal requirement. And when we talk about legal requirements, so this would be binding. Okay, so all financial institutions have to oblige with these requirements. And obviously, Bank Negara will revise and also update the relevant requirements from time to time. Okay, so reason why they have to control this capital adequacy, so that banks remain prudent in terms of their banking activities. Tak boleh terlalu extreme in terms of lending out money to credit to the customers, for example. So there will be some balance between simpan duit dengan spend it by giving out loans to the customer. So just again, kalau nak associatekan dengan kita as individual, just imagine as an individuals, you receive your monthly income. Contohnya, sekarang student, I don't know, your income can come from various sources as well. It can be from your parents, from kalau ada yang scholarship, from scholarships. Siapa yang ada PTPTN, maybe from PTPTN or any other sources. Siapa yang ada buat kerja part time can get money from that as well. So from the funds that kita receive every month combined, so kita ada tendency to use all, ataupun we have the urge to utilize our money as much as possible, right? So kalau kita tak ada regulations, okay, if we don't have any sense in terms of to keep our money, contohnya, we might, end up spend all of our money. So as individual, kita tak adalah legal requirement ni, but for those yang ada some financial knowledge, obviously from all the money that we have, we need to keep some of it. Okay, keep some of it. And the amount of money yang kita save tu must be enough to cover a certain unexpected things that might happen in the future. Okay, as a reserve jugalah, macam contohnya tadi saya cakap. So sama macam bank lah. So they have to keep certain amount of money ataupun funds for these reasons. Okay, so these are the function kenapa lah they have to make sure that they have enough capital. So that's why nama dia capital adequacy. Adequacy tu adequate kan. So adequate tu means enough. So they need to ensure that they have enough capital, okay, to meet, like I said lah, to meet all the obligation ni. Selalunya can refers to debt, can refers to all payments, relevant payments. So make sure lah duit cukup untuk cover these obligations, right? Cuma kalau kita assume every month kita akan dapat the same amount, that's one thing, but then there's possibility that there might some bad things might happen in the future, contohnya lah. Okay, that's why they need to keep this capital. So this is where there's a conflict between the institutions, the regulator, between the bank and Bank Negara Malaysia. Okay, from bank's perspective, they believe that because when we talk about funds, okay, when we talk about funds, as a bank, they want, as I mentioned tadi lah, they try kalau boleh to loan out their money, okay, to the customers as much as possible, sebab lending activities contribute the highest profits to the bank. Sebab bila dia bagi loans, financing to the customers, the charges benefit or interest to the customers usually will be high, okay, depending on products. Okay, so time, okay, at the same time, from the regulator, Bank Negara Malaysia, they concern dengan, like I said, stability. So that's why they try to control the amount of money that the bank can use. Okay, so that's why there's always conflict between the two parties. Bank kalau boleh nak freedom in terms of kita boleh bagi berapa banyak yang kita nak. Okay, tapi bank negara kata okay, you boleh bagi tapi at a certain rate saja. So you cannot exceed a certain threshold. Contohnya lah. Okay, so that's why there will be clash between these two parties. Okay, so ni ada cerita tadi. So, in terms of the capital adequacy framework, okay, this is one of the ratio actually that you will have to find. Okay, you have to calculate in your assignment. The RWCR. So RWCR stands for risk-weighted capital ratio. And here they said that the minimum requirement to comply, okay, with this ratio is at 8% at all times. Okay, when we calculate this, okay, the capital base divided by the total risk-weighted assets. Okay, here. Disconnect, yeah. But anyway, times 100. So the higher the capital ratio, signal greater safety of financial strength. So the higher the ratio, the better, basically. But the minimum, okay, the minimum is 8%. Okay, minimum is 8% all time. So kalau you check your assignments punya bank selection, I think most of the bank have higher than 8%. Okay, most of them will be higher than 8%. Okay, so 8% is the just minimum lah, requirements for them to comply with the RWCR. Okay, so that's number one. So there are several approaches to determine how much capital is required. Okay, macam-macam lah. Some of them is ratio, so one of them yang tadi kita dah tengok. Okay. On top of that, there are a lot other methods that we can use lah to determine how much capital is required. So based on ratio approaches, the capital can be split into equity and primary capital. Cuma in ratio, obviously there will be some limitation related with ratio approaches. So among others is there's no clear relationship between amount of capital to the amount of risk, and ratio approaches completely ignore the risk structure of the bank assets. Okay, unlike tadi lah RWCR tadi tengok risk structure, tapi when we talk about capital ratios, selalunya dia ignore lah. So contohnya kat sini one of other ratio measurements is by looking at the equity, okay, all the capital items, the stocks, the surplus, the retained earnings, the loan loss reserves, preferred stock debentures, ni semua kat dalam ni. This masuk kat dalam ni. The ones on top. And then they're going to divide it with the total assets and total liability, total deposits. Okay, total assets to total deposits. Okay. So about the formula and also the ratio, maybe kita just go through, but the ones that you're gonna do is the one at the back, at the very end of the topic. Okay, so kita akan go through that later. So ratio of 10% means that 10% is the minimum required ratio used by regulators to study the solvency of the banking. And this is really this current ratio yang I bagi tahu tadi lah. So risk of unexpected withdrawal at any time and also unexpected defaults on loan. So that's why they keep this 10% as a minimum required ratios. Okay. And the ones that important is actually this one, risk-based capital purchase, okay, capital risk asset ratio, whereby they segregate the assets into different categories. So here we have 5 different categories. Okay, the 0%, the 10%, 20%, 50, and also the 100% categories. Okay, so each percentage or the ratios here, or the weights of the categories relates with the types of assets that the company has. Okay, so the lowest percentage yang 0% ni comes from mostly either the government of Malaysia, okay, securities from the government of Malaysia, or if international, comes from the OECD. So OECD is Organization for Economic Cooperation. So there's a list of countries belong to this OECD. Okay, nanti you Google lah, which countries belong to OECD. Okay, so technically 0% categories is the types of assets if the company has. Kalau dia purchase securities, they invest, for example, in the sovereign fund. Sovereign fund ni maksudnya country levels fund, either from the government of Malaysia, or if it's overseas, dalam negara yang part of OECD saja. So kalau negara tu bukan OECD, it's not 0%. It can be 100% contohnya. Right? Okay, so OECD ni mesti from the country level. So country ni can be if they issue bond, for example, or they issue any securities. Okay, securities yang issue oleh negara-negara OECD and also negara Malaysia. So why 0%? It shows that it is a 0% risk. Okay, when we talk about 0% risk, it shows that these types of investment have zero.
You bersiap awal,
risk.
siap ambil air sembahyang dulu.
Ada yang cakap ke tu? Any questions?
Huh?
You have to unmute yourself. But anyway, so 0% means it's a zero risk types of assets a company or a bank could have in their accounts ataupun dalam dia punya balance sheet lah. So obviously, as I mentioned before banyak kali juga, as a financial institutions, they want to have this 0% category in their assets, so that when they measure dia punya, average risk asset dia, they can balance out dengan the types of asset in the higher risk punya category. So the second category, 10%, is from discount houses and also cagamas. So this is also, especially cagamas lah. This is also part of government punya entities, GLCs juga. And they focus more on long-term punya investment, in terms of long-term loans for property. So then the 20% is guarantees of banks, okay, financial institutions, and also banks from these OECD countries. Okay, so guarantees of financial institution ni from domestic, so maknanya all the commercial banks contohnya masuk dalam kategori ni. Kalau dia put their money in these local banks, contohnya, ataupun banks from OECD, or even development banks. Okay, remember development banks yang kita ada 6 BFIs, financial institutions. Contohnya kat dalam tu lah. So if they put their money ataupun they purchase assets from this institution, dia masuk dalam 20% category. Okay, so still consider quite low types, low risk jugalah. Okay, but moving on to the fourth one, the category dia naik to 50%. If they have assets in terms of loans secured by mortgages and residential property. So kalau the bank give out loans, okay, for property purchases by the customer, dia masuk dalam 50% categories. And any other than the 4 yang kita discuss tadi akan masuk dalam kategori 100% lah. So 100% ni is the high risk punya capital assets purchases lah. Okay, all other assets and claims not falling within the above categories yang kita discuss tadi, either the government, government-linked companies specified here, or the local banks, or loans, by financing all the home properties, masuk dalam 50%. So yang lain semua masuk dalam ni lah. So apa yang ada dalam ni can be personal loan masuk dalam ni. Kalau bank bagi personal loan, masuk dalam kategori ni. Okay, hire purchase. Okay, so masuk dalam. So selain daripada yang atas tadi lah, anything else, etc. we ada 100% kategori. So as a bank ataupun as a financial institution, dia akan average kan whatever assets that in this particular categories, and you can find this in their annual report sebenarnya. Okay, kita carilah. Financial soundness is basically to see how the financial institutions to have a management team managed by one, especially when we talk the one yang paling atas is either the CEO of the bank, or some bank mungkin managing director. Okay, so dia akan dibantulah kat bawah tu ada CFO lah. Okay, can be ada CTO lah, Chief Technology lah contohnya. And all others top management. Okay, so this management team must be very skillful, must have proper skills, must have proper education backgrounds for them to run the business. Okay, so skills and experience is really, really important. And takes into consideration the soundness of the institution's management in determining the capital needs. So, maknanya tadi, selain daripada how much money the capital required by the bank by user ratios, this management's expertise can decide as well how much money that's the banks will require, okay, by determining the needs of the capital, okay, by using the banks punya experts lah, especially from the top management and the management team. So they can use portfolio analysis. Okay, they can use portfolio analysis to measure the requirements. Okay, sikit lah kat sini dulu. And the reference, I can see the reference that bank negara, sebab bank negara sebenarnya dah set minimum tadi, macam contoh tadi minimum berapa? 8%. Okay, so this information ataupun the requirement ataupun recommendations as a bank ataupun the central bank of the country, dia boleh guna banyak resources lah in terms of references and recommendations. So one of the main important reference ataupun recommendation as a bank that they have to refer is what we call as the Basel Accords. So this is banking worldwide punya reference, and this Basel focus on one of the items is actually refers to the capital adequacy. So bank negara set regulations mengenai capital adequacy, dia nak refer kat siapa? What kind of documents they can refer? So dia boleh tengok dekat Basel punya recommendations. So Basel ni sekarang ada 3 level, 1, Basel 2 and also Basel 3. And it is issued by the Basel Committee. Okay, and this Basel based in Switzerland. So Basel nama tempat, okay, in Switzerland, but it's used to be the reference, okay, related dengan recommendations for regulations, especially for the banking industry. Okay, so the rules released bila, what are the approaches, and what will be the key features for the Basel 1, the Basel 2, and lastly the Basel number 3. Okay, so they have upgrade and improve their approach from time to time. So that's why kat sini approach to Basel 1 is backward looking, focus on actually try to improve, bukan improve lah, maknanya kita panggil dia apa, it's not proactive, dia more on I lupa the terms they use. Tapi macam if something bad happen, more on reactive. Okay, it's more on reactive instead of proactive. So that's the one. So that's why they focus on existing asset rather than the future composition. Okay, something yang dah berlaku baru dia tengok. Alright. For Basel 2 is somewhat, they call it somewhat forward-looking, risk-sensitive approach. Okay. And then the Basel 3 focus on the forward-looking, address risk relevant to bank-specific portfolios, and also the external environment factors. Okay, so ini dia punya features lah. Right, so that's the first part, which is liquidity. The first part related dengan capital adequacy. So the next part is for liquidity management. Okay, liquidity management. So liquidity management refers to the ability of the bank to meet unanticipated demands for funds. Okay, the words liquid ni you faham lah maksudnya. The access to ataupun to how to liquidate ataupun tu kata liquid juga how to change the assets into cash in a very fast time. Okay, so that's it means by liquid. So maknanya bila nak cash dia ataupun funds tu immediately dia boleh dapat. Okay, so that's how we measure liquidity. So this liquidity for banks macam cakap lah, ability untuk dia cairkan duit tu, how ataupun exchange the value of the assets kepada cash in very quick time. Sebab sometimes the banks kena prepare for this demand for cash withdrawals and also loan requests from customers. Okay. Sometimes it can be something yang, like I said lah, extraordinary. Bukan something yang kita dah expect, bukan something yang kita anticipate. Okay, sometimes it can be things that unanticipated lah. Okay, so liquidity management is generally about being sure that there's enough ataupun adequate low-cost sources of funding always available. Okay, selain daripada easy to liquidate their own assets, sometimes we need to ensure that if we cannot get our own money, right, we can borrow money in a low-cost sources. Okay, we can borrow elsewhere, tapi dengan cost yang rendah. Sebab when we talk about funds, okay, macam saya cakap sebelum ni, the cheapest funds selalunya datang daripada deposits. Okay, the cheapest option. Tapi kalau deposits ni kita rendah ataupun low, okay, so obviously we have to borrow. So we want to have this option lah, low cost sources of funding. So how to strategize related with liquidity management? Number one, whole portfolio of assets that easily be sold. Okay, and liquidate for us to convert it into cash. So property contohnya, rumah and whatnot is not a good portfolio when we talk about liquidity. Okay, as you all know lah, nak jual rumah, it can take months to sell. And kalau you boleh jual cepat pun, you might have to sacrifice the value. Okay, so that's why for liquidity purposes, you need to ensure that amount of money for this reason kena dalam bentuk liquid. Benda yang senang jual and convert into cash very easily. Acquire large volume of stable liabilities. Okay, again, when we talk about liabilities, you always refer it to deposits. Okay, so you can ada volume yang besar with deposits, and because deposit, as I mentioned, is one of the cheapest source of funds to the bank. So kalau dia ada large volume of deposits, obviously dia tak ada masalah in terms of managing the liquidity of the bank. And maintain credit with other financial institutions. Okay, this is where funding from external. Okay, so they might have to borrow money from other financial institutions. So bila nak pinjam dengan financial institution, dia kena adalah this line of credit. Okay, credit adalah a facility, okay, facility that they have to maintain with other financial institutions, so that if they need some funding in short term basis, dia boleh pinjam dengan other financial institutions, and kalau boleh try to borrow at a cheaper rates. Okay, as you all know, selalunya when we talk about borrow money with the financial institutions, we have these 3%, sekarang 6% kan, about 6% based on 6% ke? Okay, 6% lah. Check. Yeah, 6%. 3%, sorry. Okay, it's 3% rates. Okay, that we if the bank wants to borrow with another financial institution, selalunya it will be the base lah. Base. Okay, so the institution might offer higher ataupun charge higher rates to the bank if they want to borrow it. So under liquidity, we have two ratios kat sini. Number one, loans to total assets ratio. And number two, loans to total deposit ratio. So we have two different types of ratios. So loans, okay, loans ni, maybe I have to take kat sini lah. From the bank's perspective, okay, from the bank's perspective, katakanlah letak sini assets and liability, So for a bank, okay, deposits dia ada dekat liability. Okay, it is to the bank deposits. And when we talk about assets, we have loans kat sini. Ataupun financing. Okay, so loans or financing is actually assets, but these loans, financing generate income and generate returns to the bank. So obviously, it is asset to the bank lah. Tetapi from bank's perspective, deposit adalah liability because they have to pay return, interest, dividend to the depositors. That's why it is liability to the bank. So when we talk about loans to total assets, so loans tu ada dekat asset lah. You look dalam bank's statement in the asset side, and it is part of the assets. It's salah satu item dalam assets lah. So this to total asset, it means the small portion ataupun the portion of assets, the portion of loans and financing in the assets, and then dia akan bahagi dengan tu ni, maknanya divide by, ratio dia lebih kurang macam ni, loans divide by total assets. Okay, divide by total assets. So assets untuk loans and financing, this is one of them lah. So dia ada banyak lagi kat dalam ni kan. Banyak lagi amount dia. Contohnya kat sini, kita ada 4, and then kita akan total kat sini kan. Total assets. Okay, so technically it will be number 1, yang ni, total asset, divide by total asset. So then we get the ratio lah, berapa persen of the loans and financing dengan total assets yang ada. Okay, or secondly, we can measure using loans juga, the same value, but now divide with the deposits kat sini. So deposit ni ada dekat liability. Okay, what will be the ratio? Remember, for banks, majority of funds datang dalam bentuk deposits, and majority of usage will go in the form of loans and financing. So here we want to see lah, from the deposits yang ada, katakanlah kat sini 1 billion. If the deposit is 1 billion, berapa banyak financing yang diberi? Maknanya kalau 1 billion juga, contohlah 1 billion, it means the 100% deposits channeled to the loans and amounts, contohnya. So it will be 100% lah kat situ, loan to deposit. Or it can be something like that. Okay, so this is how we measure liquidity. So higher level of loan and higher level of purchase borrowed liabilities, indicators of liquid position, level of cash, and so on, is also a sign of liquid position. Okay. So commercial banks' liquidity requirement have been met from two different reserves, primary and secondary. So for the primary, it comes from their capital reserve with Bank Negara Malaysia. And there's minimum level that must be maintained. Okay, so primary reserve ni boleh letak kat sini lah. In Malaysia, it's called statutory reserve requirement. Or in short, it's SR, SRR, statutory reserve requirement. So this is a requirement by law. When they use the word statutory, it shows that it is required by law that the banks ataupun all the financial institutions, katakanlah all of you ada your own banks for your group assignments. So all of your banks, okay, you can see their amount of reserve that they put in Bank Negara Malaysia. Okay, and this is required by law mentioned, and this is to ensure solvency of the bank system. Yeah. And as I mentioned, it is to accommodate monetary policy as well lah. Okay, monetary policy as well. So kalau tak salah, this is where the rate is 6% of eligible liabilities. Okay, so there are eligible liabilities yang ada from the deposit, especially 6% of it you can keep dalam negara ni. Okay, dalam form of bulk cash ataupun dalam bentuk deposit. Okay, to keep it with the bank negara. So bank negara akan gunakan lah this 6% for various policy, especially related dengan monetary policy ataupun as a reserve ataupun as a cushion. If all individual banks ada problem, so bank negara ada duit lah untuk tolong ataupun bantu all these financial institutions. Right. Second is the secondary reserve. So secondary reserve, okay, beza dengan primary. When we talk about primary, selalunya this amount of deposits ataupun reserve in the bank negara usually will not generate income. Okay, usually they will not generate income. So bank negara will not pay them any returns. Okay, but in order for the bank nak make sure that their capital can generate some element of returns, dia boleh guna secondary reserve. Okay, so secondary reserve adalah dalam bentuk treasury bills and or any other government securities lah, government securities. Okay, or any bankers acceptance is from the other FIs financial institution yang lain. So dia boleh invest in bankers acceptance from other financial institutions as well. So these two are very liquid. Okay, that's why reserve ni dia kena liquid so that if anything happen, they nak convert into cash, they can get the money quite easily and fast. Okay, so T-bills, government securities, and bank acceptance is from other financial institutions. So these two obviously will generate return. Walaupun tak banyak. Okay, walaupun tak banyak, obviously, at least their reserve can generate something. Sebab kalau you nak high returns, obviously dia bukan dalam reserve lah. Reserve will not generate a lot of money. So the money making activities datang daripada asset dia. Reserve ni bukan dalam asset reserve dekat dalam part of the liability equity side. Okay, so for a bank, obviously dia nak generate return kan. So at least kat sini boleh generate small returns, but for them, the majority of their money coming from their assets lah. Especially when we talk about finance. So ni sources of liquidity kat mana nak dapat can be in the form of new deposits from maturing asset. Maknanya asset yang dah nak mature, yang kalau di invest in a certain period of time, bila deposit ataupun asset tu dah nak mature, so dia akan dapat some form of returns ataupun dia punya principal pun mungkin boleh dapat. If they want to sell their assets pun akan dapat some funds. Okay, reduce ataupun reduction of assets will be a source of liquidity as well. And if not, they can borrow money as well. So all of this will be sources of liquidity ataupun technically all of these are actually sources of funds to the bank. And in determining all the relevant policies related dengan asset and liquidity for a bank, they have one committee which is called as ALCO, the Asset Liquidity Management Committee. And this committee manage banks' asset and liabilities and ensure to balance the risk exposures so that tak terlalu high risk semua dia punya assets and tak terlalu low risk semua. Sebab as I mentioned before, high risk associated dengan high return. Similarly, low risk dengan low return. So dia kena balance kan lah. Tak semua dekat high risk and obviously tak semua in the low risk. So they have to make sure the matching between the risk exposures with their expectation of returns so that they can achieve their operating objective. So setiap banks akan ada different lah operating objective. So some banks might have bigger risk appetite. So therefore they are willing to take more risks as compared to the other banks. So who will decide these strategies, this policy, this ALCO lah yang akan decide. Okay, so these are the functions. Okay, basically to ensure liquidity and also profitability at the same time. Cuma dia kena ensure, as I mentioned lah, the keywords is actually to balance between assets and liquidity. Okay. Before I move on, let's take 5, right? Related dengan asset quality. And then kita akan continue after the break. Kita stop sekejap. Okay, next is about asset quality. So as I mentioned at the end, when we talk about bank, here. So when we talk about banks' assets, we are talking about loans financing. So that's why we talk. The third element here is about asset quality. So asset quality is actually referring to the quality of the loans or financing that the banks have in their balance sheet. Okay, so obviously loan is one of the, as I mentioned, largest source ataupun the usage of funds that they use. So loan is actually an arrangement whereby borrower obtains from funds from a lender. So lender ni usually banks to finance their businesses. But when we talk about loans, it's not necessarily about that business alone. Okay, it can be borrower ni can be business owners contohnya, but it can be retail ataupun individual as well. Okay, can be from retail atau individual ataupun obviously can be in the form of businesses. Okay, and the reason why they have loans is not necessarily for business activities, but it can be, again, for various factors. It can be for purchase a house, to purchase a car, okay, assumption for personal loans juga pun boleh juga. So the funds are obtained in exchange for an agreement for the borrower to repay the funds in later dates. And obviously they will incorporate the element of finance charges kat dalam. Okay, kalau conventional banks, they incorporate interest lah. Okay, but for Islamic banks, perhaps they will charge profits. Cuma from banks' perspective, it's not loans. As I mentioned, they will call financing. Okay, financing for Islamic. Islamic. So there are two categories of loans. Okay, the secured and unsecured. Okay, nak differentiate is very simple. When we talk about secured, ada word secure kat sini. So it means that it's backed by assets or collateral. Okay, what does it mean by collateral? Collateral ni simply means cagaran. Cagaran. Okay, and it is secure. Selamat. Okay, what does it mean? As a bank, if it has a secured loan, it means every loans yang dia bagi kepada customer, so their borrowers, it will be backed by collateral. So if anything happen to the loans, meaning if the customer ataupun the borrower cannot repay back the loans, they have the assets to cover the defaults. Okay, so meaning if the customer defaults, the bank can repossess the assets and sell the assets in order to pay off all the remaining loans yang ada lah. Unlike the second part, which is the unsecured loan, unsecured. So loans are not backed by any assets. Okay, ataupun dalam ni ditulis clean basis. And lender has general claims to asset of borrowers if default occurs. So general claim ni kepada assets yang lain daripada yang termasuk dalam loan tu lah, tapi ada syarat tertentu lah before they can claims on the other types of assets. Okay, and usually the unsecured loan will be backed by promise sahaja lah. So the borrower promise to pay back, but without any security or collateral. Okay, so between the two, obviously, this one is higher risk. Okay, because it's not backed by any collateral. So if the customer cannot repay back, okay, so they don't have this second level of protection for the bank, especially to repossess ataupun to take over the assets in order to repay the loans. Okay, so these are the types of loans ataupun facilities that they have. I tak nak go through in details. Nanti you baca lah, the OD, overdraft, term loans, and this is actually part of your assignment as well, when you have to discuss the types of financing of a bank. Okay, term loans. Okay, and these are the trade finance products. Okay, so from bank's perspective, they have 6 different bank credit process. So these are the cycle of a loan. Okay, so it will start off, number 1, with the BD ataupun business development and marketing. So obviously in a bank they will have a marketing ataupun sales team ataupun business development team that will promote their products and services to their potential clients. So if there's any potential clients that are interested with the products, they might submit their applications. Okay, they submit applications with all the relevant documents. When they submit, then comes to the second stage, whereby the bank's processing can evaluate all the documents and together with the documentation yang lain lah. Okay, they check whether this particular customer is eligible for the credit or not. So this processing akan go through all the documents, and if possible ataupun if necessary, they might call the applicants to check whether the application is indeed valid punya ataupun genuine applications lah. Right, so once they do all the necessary evaluation process, they will send for documentation and also approval. So if the loan is approved, they will send to the loan documentation, and next, number 4, okay, they after all the documentation completes, they will disperse the loan. Disbursing is a process of release the fund. Okay, tengoklah what type of loan. So kalau it is a personal loan, the fund will be dispersed to the applicant, to the customer. So customer apply personal loan. So bila everything is complete from 1 to 3, step number 4, bank akan release the money to the borrower directly. Tapi kalau dia nak beli kereta contohnya, so the loan will be disbursed to the car dealers, okay, yang jual kereta tu lah. or if dia beli rumah contohnya, so the loan will be disbursed accordingly to the property developer. Okay, ataupun kalau dia beli rumah yang dah siap, dia akan jual kepada penjual rumah lah. Ataupun dia akan release, disburse the loan to the seller of the house. Okay, so the loan will be disbursed to the relevant parties. So number 5, dia akan admin. Okay, admin ni maksudnya dia akan monitor the progress of the loan repayments. So dia akan check lah sama ada the customer akan pay the monthly according to the schedule or not. Is there any late payments happen? Okay, so dia akan administer and technically monitor. Dia akan monitor the progress of payment. Okay, dia nak progress ni technically dia akan tengok monitor progress of payment. Okay, payment of the loan. And finally, the final step, okay, if necessary, it's not necessarily ada every time, but there are some cases, step number 6 needs to be done, whereby if they monitor, okay, they monitor the loans, and then ada issue with payments, customer tak bayar, customer, defaults in terms of the payments, so they might have to use the final step, which is the loan recovery. So they have to use multiple recovery techniques if possible, ataupun whatever relevant techniques for them to recover. So kat sini adalah cerita pasal good collateral. Nanti you baca. Okay, types of collateral that is considered good, right? Especially in terms of the value kat sini lah. Kat sini kot. The types of collateral yang preferable by the bank. Okay, because in terms of the value, and in terms of the resistance, in terms of the value, itulah tak turun naik, dia tak volatile. So in the loan admin, so dalam cerita red flag ni sebenarnya happen in loan admin tadi, loan administration. So under the loan admin, they have to monitor, kan? They have to monitor, so they can put a warning signs to a few actions by the customers. So customer tu bila dia behave differently ataupun behave awkwardly, so we can sense that something might be wrong. So that's why the terms red flag ni adalah warning sign, especially from the bank's perspective lah, warning sign. So the red flags can be categorized into 3: how the customer operates the account, how the operations of the business. Kalau the peminjam tu adalah business owners, we can see from the operations of the business. And number 3, threats in the changing environment. So this is all from external environment. External ni, when we say external, it means it can be government policy, it can be the industry punya change in terms of their landscape and whatnot lah. Okay, so I just pick a few as ni to give you some flavors. What does it mean by red flags? So untuk account operation, like I said, this is predominantly how the customer behave with their account operations. Macam mana dia, kalau dia ada loans, macam mana dia behave. So contohnya kat sini, number 1 dengan number 2 ni boleh combine together lah. Meaning, there's always delay ataupun failure to pay the loans on time. So kalau dia delay, sebab dia ada jadual kan, okay. Bila dah disburse loan, you have to pay every 28 of the month contohnya. Setiap 28 hari bulan, you have to pay your loans. Tapi kalau setiap bulan, always delay, always kadang-kadang miss bulan ataupun 2 bulan. So it shows some signs lah. Macam saya cakap tadi, it's a warning sign. Red flag ni adalah warning sign. So if you monitor ataupun administer this kind of loans, you have to pay closer attention to this customer. Okay, sebab there's a tendency that this can go really bad lah in terms of your customer. Okay, kalau dari segi business operation, we are looking at their operations of business. Bukan mengenai account dia tak bayar hutang tu, tak. Tapi dari segi what they do with their own business. So contohnya dalam company tu, dia seorang je yang manage everything. Okay, so it's a one-person management. So this is a very bad lah. Kita kalau boleh tak nak ada ni. And there's no succession planning. Okay, we don't want this as well. So maknanya, kalau dia tak ada orang lain yang boleh handle task contohnya. So these two quite related jugalah. One management, maknanya dia seorang je buat kerja semua, and kalau dia tak ada, dia tak tahu siapa yang boleh ganti dia in the future at least. Okay, and frequent changes ni very technical sikit lah. So every companies kena audit their accounts. So if they keep changing the auditors to check the accounts, it shows something wrong dengan dia punya business lah. So maknanya dia tak puas hati dengan audit from the company, they change to other audit firms in order for them to get a good result with regards to the auditing results. And usually when they change to a lesser known audit firms, results in lower standard of reporting system. Okay, kalau dari segi environment, as I said, this is from external. So contohnya ada penambahan dari segi undang-undang daripada kerajaan, changing demand or trend, especially related dengan certain industry. Okay, certain industry yang mungkin dah panggil dia sunset industry, industri yang dah senja, yang dah towards the end of the life, mungkin dah demand dia dah tak tinggi. So mungkin masa kita bagi loan tu, the demand is high, tapi kalau kita tengok, the trend is changing. Some products dah tak longer relevant. So contoh macam dululah industri telecommunication contohnya. This is a very fast changing industry. Okay. So some gadgets or instruments or can be relevant now, tapi in 5 years, 10 years from now, we're not sure whether it's still relevant or not. Either they still maintain the same thing, tapi they update the features and whatnot, tapi ada certain mungkin totally obsolete. Okay, contoh paling senang, pager. You pernah dengar pager? So in the 1980s, for example, pager is really important as a telecommunication punya tool, whereby we can send messages. Okay, cuma masa tu bukan guna phone. So pager ni is just to send text. I tak ingat berapa characters that they can send to another party yang you nak bagi tahu lah. Kalau yang selalunya pakai pager last time, doctors for example, kalau dia ada important information, masa tu tak ada mobile phones, so pager would be the medium untuk communicate lah. However, we don't use pager anymore because now we have mobile phone. So ini contoh lah changing demand. So dulu company yang operates ataupun offer this pager products mungkin hot sebab everyone will buy their products, tapi if you give financing to this company, dia selamat lah, tapi we can see the trend after a while dia akan drop. So kita kena monitor lah this kind of external elements and changes in entry barriers kalau melibatkan international business lah, sebab international business kena operate overseas and they might need funding, so dia pinjam duit dengan kita, tapi tiba-tiba the industry have barriers to enter to a certain country. Okay, nak masuk negara lain susah. Contohnya lah, so sepatutnya dia nak buat business in a certain country, so that dia boleh dapat income from that country, tapi kalau country tu change the policy, so it will affect basically the company. Okay, so tu contoh-contoh red flag lah dari segi account operations, business and also environment. Okay, the rest nanti you baca lah. So the final step, that is step number 6, if we monitor, we identify the red flags, kita try to pay close attention to the customer, tapi still customer tak mampu bayar balik. So we have few techniques. So number 1 is CWA, Cooperative Workout Agreement. We have collateral liquidation, enforcement of judgment dengan bankruptcy. Okay, so CWA is basically negotiation. Okay, negotiation between both parties. So who are the parties? The borrower and the lender lah. So borrower adalah customer and the lender is the bank. So they have to negotiate. So what kind of negotiation? Selalunya what they do, especially the customer lah. The customer might request to reduce monthly installment contohnya. Okay, minta lah sebelum ni bayar RM1,000 per month. The request, okay, can I get a lower monthly installments to 500? Because 500 je I mampu nak bayar. Because my business have problems, so I cannot commit to 1,000 for time being. Can you reduce it to 500? either permanently ataupun for a certain time period. Okay, so kena negotiate lah. So it's possible to negotiate with the bank. Okay, so selain daripada itu, bila dia reduce monthly installment, obviously they have to prolong the loan tenure lah. So loan tenure. So this loan tenure will be extend. Okay, they're gonna extend the loan tenure, make it longer a bit lah. Kalau sebelum ni patutnya habis dalam masa 5 tahun, now it will extend to a further 2 or 3 years. Okay, with the reduction of monthly installments, tapi dia panjangkan tempoh pembayaran. Okay, so they have to negotiate. Okay, so these are among the corrective measures that they can do. Yang salah satu tadi terms lah, terms of agreement dengan restructuring of the schedule. Okay. Second action yang dia boleh ambil adalah collateral liquidation. If it is a secured loan tadi, it's backed by collateral. So this is a time the bank can repossess, tarik all the assets and convert it into cash in order to pay the loan balance. Okay, termasuklah the interest and also the principal lah, obviously. Okay, interest and principal they akan try to recover by using the assets that they have. So kalau dia beli, customer tadi use the loans to purchase a house, the house tu is the collateral, so the house will be repossessed. So that's why you nampak rumah lelong and whatnot tu kan. So those are actually part of collateral liquidation. Okay, bank tarik rumah tu, okay, and then dia akan lelong to the using selalunya melalui auction lah. Liquidation selalunya melalui auction ataupun di Malay sebab lelong kan. Right, so with the intention to get the amount of money to repay these outstanding loans. Okay, cuma kadang-kadang ada isu bila dah jual pun still ada balance. So kalau ada balance, kita akan masuk kategori yang ketiga lah, enforcement of judgment. So enforcement of judgment ni ada dua reason. Pertama, kalau ingat tadi CWA, kita dah reschedule kan, kita reschedule the payments and whatnot, we change the terms and conditions. However, there's a possibility that the borrower ignore. Kita dah buat agreement baru, tapi still borrower cannot repay. So we need to use the third factor lah, the enforcement judgment. Or sometimes, as I mentioned, bila dia dah jual tadi via auction, the value still not sufficient to cover both principal and interest. Pun possible juga lah. So they're gonna use enforcement judgment. So how to do it? Number one, reduce debt to judgment, and second, enforcement and collection. So enforcement menggunakan all of this. You baca what kind of enforcement that they can do, and every enforcement ni ada description ya. Okay, levy and whatnot. And worst case scenario, step number 4 is to file for bankruptcy. So kalau dalam Malaysia sekarang, to file bankruptcy, the person must have debts ataupun outstanding debt worth RM100,000. At least RM100,000. Okay, kalau bawah RM100,000, kita tak boleh file them for bankruptcy. Okay, tapi kalau dia ada jumlah amount of debts worth RM100,000 and above, okay, then the application can be done via court order. So why we file for bankruptcy? To provide orderly manner in terms of repayment. So maknanya bila kita stop this person and file them for bankruptcy, so automatically account ni semua akan freeze. Account freeze, so dia tak boleh buat pinjaman, dia tak boleh ada bank account and everything. So assets dia akan dikumpulkan, dikira how much value and try to repay whatever debts that they have. Okay, semua harta dia akan dikumpul, akan dikira, and they're gonna try to use the assets to make all the repayments. Okay, sampai semua hutang tu habis dibayar lah. And after a while, kalau dia hutang dah habis bayar, then they can go out from the bankruptcy status. So selagi dia dalam bankruptcy status, they cannot enjoy whatever normal individuals can do lah, especially related dengan banking. Okay, so ni adalah dia punya steps go to the court, appoint creditors committee. Sebab creditors ni selalunya melibatkan multiple banks ataupun whatever creditors yang ada. Dia akan appoint trustee to take care of all the borrowers asset tadi yang akan dikumpul dan dikira, and the trustee ni adalah third party, orang yang ketiga. And dia akan jual and akan divide lah. Okay. Bank A ada hutang berapa, so bayar kat bank A dulu, then second, and so on. Sampai kalau ada balance lah, kalau tak cukup, dia kena cover balik lah the debt tu sampailah habis bayar semua. Okay, selagi tak habis bayar, so he or she will still in the bankruptcy status lah. Okay, sampai everything in terms of debt will be settled. Okay, this one I tak nak cerita again. Statement of financial position of a commercial bank I showed you in the previous topic, right? The net interest income, profit. So this is the income statement lah, right? So in the financial ratios, okay, kita ada discuss all of this ni tadi, okay, and we can simplify, okay, ataupun the framework yang kita guna pakai is known as Camel framework. Second. It's known as Camel framework. So every element kat sini is represented by the letter tadi lah. So this is C. So this is the A, asset quality, capital adequacy, and then we have the M, management. So what is E? E is the earnings. So E is earnings, profitability, and this is liquidity. So C, A, M, E, F. So it's not in sequence, tapi that's the Camel framework lah. So capital adequacy, asset quality, the management, the earnings performance, the profitability just now, and also the liquidity. Okay, so each elements have their own financial ratios. Okay, so I tak sure group ni ataupun group satu lagi ada tanya about one of the ratios, and I noticed something kat sini. When we have this interest income minus interest expense. So some of the reference, they don't use the word net interest margin. Macam yang you tengok tadi ya, give me 1 second. Kat sini, interest income minus interest expense is called net interest income. Okay, so technically, interest income minus interest expenses, this is net interest income. Okay, you boleh ubah lah kat sini. Okay, this is net interest income. So in order to find the spread, okay, so technically it's net interest income ataupun interest income minus interest expense, okay, divide by total assets. Okay, itu kalau E dia lah. Tapi again, each and every single ratios ni you can find the information from the financial statements lah. And as I mentioned, I think in the previous class, some of the information you kena cari dalam notes to the financial statement. Okay, kena cari dalam notes, some of them lah. Tapi yang lain tu kebanyakannya is either in the statement of financial positions or it can be in the income statement. Okay, so everything here you can find in the financial ratios lah. So in this ratio, I letak dalam instructions juga. Cuma alert on this lah, net interest income dengan spread punya formula ni. Okay, so yang spread technically whatever you have on top here, you divide by dengan total assets. Okay, since I asked you to do 3 years kan, so technically you are doing a time series, time series punya analysis. Okay, time series analysis whereby you compare your bank's performance in 3 years time, sama ada dia increasing ke, naik macam ni ke, or is it in a decreasing mode ke, or it can be naik turun ke, or it can be stagnant ke. So you can discuss. Cuma dia tempoh pendek lah, about 3 years sahaja. So you don't have longer time series. Okay, I suppose to ask you to do more sepatutnya lah, 5 years ke. Then you can have better analysis, tapi tak apalah sebab I suruh you buat 3 tahun. So you just analyze the 3 years punya performance based on all the ratios and comment Sebab selain daripada time series, sepatutnya you can buat comparative. Okay, comparative. So meaning bank A versus bank B. Then you compare performance. Okay, but for this time around, I just ask you to do the time series. Do a time series, compare the performance of the bank in 3 years' time. The latest one, remember I cakap dah sebelum ni kot. The latest data that you can have ataupun you can get is just in 2022. Ni yang paling latest. 2023 just baru habis like ni bulan 11 kan. So you just finished 11 days or 12 days ago. So you will not get to all 2023 punya data just yet. Okay, so the latest that you're going to have is 2022. So find 3 years backwards lah. So you're going to have 2021 and 2020. So 3 tahun ni je lah yang you sepatutnya buat. Okay, so with that is end of topic number 8. Okay, and I think that's about it for today. So hopefully I berjaya lah record video ni sebab it has a lot of problems with the line earlier. Tapi sekarang nampak the network is getting better. Tapi tadi around 4-ish when we started tadi we have slight problems with the connection. All right, so I think that's about it. Thank you very much. And I'll see you guys next week lah. If anything, I'll let you know in terms of either face-to-face or online or even video. Okay, we have plenty of options. So I'll let you know next week. All right, thank you.
Doctor.
Thank you,
Betul.
Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you,
You're
Doctor.
welcome. Okay. All right, thanks.